Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we will learn about client components while building a small project in Next.js. And I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students, and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. I've got VS Code open and I'm in the directory that has my Next.js series, and you can see the different lessons here. We're going to create a new one today, but what I want to say first is we've already learned you can fetch data at the highest level component, a server component, and you can continue to fetch the data wherever it's needed because Next.js is going to deduplicate those fetch requests. We've learned all about server components, but we haven't covered client components yet, and if you need a click handler, hook, or other interactivity, you're going to need a client component. So let's start today by creating a new Next.js project. I'm going to open the terminal with Control and a backtick. I'll type clear to remove whatever is currently in my terminal. And then I'm going to type npx create-next-app at latest. And since we're learning the newest features, I'm going to add --experimental-app. Press enter, and we're going to go with the defaults. I'm going to name my project Next.05, and yes, you can see we're on Next 13.2.4 right now, as it says, and yes, it's okay to proceed, so I'll just enter a Y there and press enter. What am I going to name this? This is Next.05 for me. You can name it what you want to, and then I'm going to say yes for TypeScript, yes for ESLint, and no for the source directory because we're using the new app directory. Then just press enter here for the import alias as well. It's installing everything and going to create this project. And then I'm going to, of course, go out of this directory after it's created, and we'll open up the Next.05 directory so we can be working inside of that folder. Okay, we've created the new project, and I now have the Next.05 directory open here in VS Code, and we can see the files in the file tree. But what I want to bring your attention to now is the website for Tailwind, because we're going to add Tailwind CSS to this project. And the first thing you want to do on the tailwindcss.com website is go to Docs. And from Docs, you can see we're at the documentation over here on the left-hand side. And then it says Get Started with Tailwind CSS. We can go to Framework Guides, and from there, they have Next.js right here at the top. So let's click that, and it's going to walk us through installing Tailwind CSS with Next.js. Now, the very first step we have already completed. We did that when we created our application, so we no longer need to do number one. We can move right along to number two. And you can see we need to execute these lines here at the terminal prompt. So what I'm going to do is just copy. You can click the copy icon here, and then I'm going to bring VS Code back up, and in VS Code I'll open a terminal with Control and the backtick, and I'm going to right click, and it puts in the first line, and it immediately starts executing that. And after the first line, I think we'll have the second line as well. And yes, here's the second line now, and so I need to press enter for this one. So we'll go ahead and do that too. So now we've executed both lines. So you just have to remember to press enter for the second one. And now you can see we have a tailwind.config.js over here to the left, and we're ready to go to the next step on the Tailwind website. So let's pull that up, and it says configure your template path. So inside of that tailwind.config.js, we need to add the following lines here. So I'm just going to copy all of this. Now we're not using the source directory, so I'll remove those afterwards. So Control C to copy. Let's go back into VS Code. And in VS Code, I'll close the terminal for now. Let's go into our Tailwind config. And that was in the content area, if I remember correctly. So I'm just going to highlight the brackets and Control V to paste. Yeah, I've got two contents now. So I can back that up. And after that, I've also got two commas there, so remove that error. Now I'm not using the source directory, so I'm going to get rid of these lines, but we'll keep these three lines here between the brackets. You can see we're going to use the app directory, and it's also got something in here for pages or possibly components. Now let's go back to the Tailwind site again for the next step. I'll scroll down. It says add these directives to your globals.css. So let's once again copy. Now let's go back to our globals CSS file in our next project. Let's find where that is. I believe we would be looking in the app directory. There's globals.css. I'm just going to Control A to select all of this because it goes with the starter project and we don't need it. So I hit backspace. I'm going to paste in the 3 directives here and Control S to save this file. And now back at the Tailwind site once again, let's look at the next step. It says start your build process with npm run dev. Well, we definitely know how to do that. And then it says we can start using Tailwind. So we're really complete now, and we can just go back and do npm run dev if we want to, but I'm going to make some other changes first. Let's start by going to the page.tsx file inside of the app directory. And here we can clear out a lot of things we're not going to use, including this first line that imports image. We're not going to use that today. We can also get rid of the styles here. We're not going to use the page.module.css. We'll actually remove that file here in just a minute. But let's keep the enter font from Google as we see imported here, and we need this other line that defines enter as well. After that, let's grab everything between the main element, the opening and closing tag, and just remove that here from the starter project. So I will press Shift and click and select everything in between. And now we have really cleared out our home page here, our main element inside of this. But instead of styles.main, which styles no longer exists, let's just apply that enter font right here. And we can do that with enter.className as we pass into the class name and save this file. Now I mentioned we will no longer need this page.module.css, so let's just press delete here to remove that file. And now let's create a components directory here inside of the app directory. So I'll just highlight this and click the new folder, and I'm going to type components. And then inside of components, I'm going to create a Navbar file. So we'll do this with the capital N.tsx. Then inside of the Navbar, we can just type RFC if you have ES7 React snippets like I do, and press Tab, and it will start a function for us. Now we're going to need to import link at the top. So I'm going to press enter a couple of times and say import link. And this comes from next/link. Oh, I need a lowercase link. There we go. And now that I've imported the link, we just need to change what we're returning here. So let's go ahead and put some elements inside. We'll start with a nav element, which makes sense. And inside of that, an h1 element. And inside of our h1, we will use the link. And this link is going to point to, with an href, back to the home page, because this navbar will be available on all pages when we use it correctly. And inside of this, we're going to call our small project WikiRocket, and I'll put an exclamation mark after that. Now, while I'm going to apply Tailwind classes today, I'm not going to go over each one and have you learn Tailwind along the way. That should have been one of the prerequisites as you started in lesson 1. So you can copy my classes from my available source code in the course resources if you want to. I'm just going to quickly add them by pasting them in today. So we'll see class name on the nav, and I'm going to paste in several classes. Now you can see it's a long line, so I'll press Alt-Z to wrap that line down. After that, I have a few more classes to go ahead and apply to the H1 as well. So I'll put a class name here, and I will paste in the following classes as well. After that, we're pretty much finished with the navbar for now. We will come back and add something else. So now let's look at the layout.tsx, where we will want to use this navbar so it shows up on all of our pages. So we need to import the navbar first, and we get that from components navbar. Notice we already have metadata here at the top, and we can just leave this, or you could change it to the WikiRocket information if you want to. That is fine also. So we have our root layout here, and it receives the children. That's all good. So all we really need to do is put our navbar inside of the body with the children here. And a common mistake would be to put it outside of the body. I think that would be easy to do. But right now, we want to make sure it's inside. So here we'll just have our navbar and put a slash there to in the component. Let's also put a Tailwind class on the body, so we have a darker page. So I'll say class name equals, and here I'm going to use background, slate, and a dark one, so 800. Now we won't have much to look at yet, but let's go ahead and open a terminal with Control backtick and type npm run dev, and we should see our Tailwind applied to our basic site as we start it up here. I'll click allow for that message and control click on localhost 3000 as it shows here in the terminal, and I can pull that up inside of Chrome. And yes, we have our WikiRocket navbar across the top that has a little bit lighter slate cover than the rest of the body where we applied the darker slate cover. And that's all applied with Tailwind. And so now you know how to set that up in Next.js and get a project started. Now we'll head back to VS Code and I'll pull that up. We'll go ahead and close out the terminal window. So now our next step is the focus of what we are covering today, and that is the client component. And we want to build a search component that will be in our navbar. So in the same components directory as the navbar, let's go ahead and create a new file. And let's name this file search.tsx. We want to start our client components with use client at the top. And you may have seen this before. You should recognize this because we used this inside of the error.tsx when we covered creating error pages. It was provided by the documents, and error pages must always be client components as well. So after we have gone ahead and typed use client, let's use our ES7 snippets again with RFC and create that default search component as well. Now we have a couple of imports to go ahead and bring in at the top. So I'm going to import use state from React. And then I'm also going to import use router from not next/router. That was the default actually. This new version, we want next/navigation. So we just want to make sure that that import is the correct one. And notice that my default was wrong. So now at the top of our component, let's go ahead and use state, and I'll just say const, and we'll call this search. And set search, you should be familiar with this. Understanding React already is one of the prerequisites for this Next.js series. And let's just make the state an empty string to begin with. This will hold our current search term. Then let's define our router and set this equal to use router. And now we're going to have a search input, and we're going to need to be able to handle that input as the form is submitted. So let's go ahead and create a handle submit function. Call this handle submit, and it will be async. And now I guess I need to put an event here. We don't know the type of the event yet, so let's come back to find out what that type is, and I'll show you how you can do that also. But we'll start with event.prevent default, as we do not want the page to reload when it's submitted. Then we'll set the search back to an empty string after we have submitted the current search, and then we'll also route to the location for the results. And that's one thing that we'll do here in Next.js that's a little different than how you might do it in a regular React app, because we route to a new page that will have the address of the search term. So I'll say router.push, and now this will take us to whatever the root URL is, and then add on to that root URL our search term. So I'll put in the search state right here. And we can look more at how that works after we get everything working. And you'll see what I mean when we look at the URL and how that search term is added. Oh, and I want to add another slash at the end of the URL as well. Now let's change what we return here. So our return can still have the parentheses, but we'll remove this div. We're actually going to have a form. Now this form will not have an action on it, but it will have an onSubmit, and it will have more classes from Tailwind. So let me just grab the classes first, and we'll put class name over here. And we'll set that equal to the Tailwind classes that we are applying. Now, anytime you just want to pause the video and copy my classes, or copy them once again, as I mentioned, from the source code available at the link in the description for this lesson, you can do that as well. Okay, after that, we also need the onSubmit handler. So we'll say onSubmit. I'm going to press Alt-Z so this wraps down once again. And we'll just pass in our handle submit that we created. Okay, now we need the inside of the form, the actual input itself. So we'll put in an input element, And after that, yes, it is type text. I like to put these on separate lines, so it's just a little more organized, especially when you have several different attributes. Okay, so after the type equals text, the value will be equal to the search state, as it's a controlled input. After that, we'll have an onChange, and here with the onChange, we're going to set the state. So I need curly brackets, and then we'll have an event here. And this event is going to go ahead and go in here, and we'll use the target value that we get. So we'll have set search, and you have probably completed this before as you learned React, but event.target.value. So anytime this changes, this sets up our controlled input essentially. After that, we're going to have some Tailwind classes we apply here also. So I'll set this in here, and I'll just bring these classes over quickly, and it should make the input look a little nicer. After that, let's go ahead and add a placeholder. And the placeholder will just be the text that displays until we enter something. We can just say search. So that is our input. Now let's add a button to go ahead and submit the search. So the button is going to have some classes as well, but inside the button, instead of saying go or something like that, I'm going to press the Windows key and the period because I'm on Windows, and it brings up an emoji menu. You may have a different way of doing this on Mac or Linux if you're on one of those operating systems. I'm just going to type rocket, and it's going to show the rocket here. Remember, we're making a WikiRocket application. So we've got our button with a rocket, and I just want to apply some class names here as well. So class names equal, and I will bring these over, and it's a short list, but it should make it for a nicer looking button. And now we've applied the Tailwind classes, and our form is complete. So we have the controlled input that sets the state as we type, and that shouldn't be a new concept for you if you've already understood React or taken the beginning React course. Back up here then, we have our handle submit. This would be a new concept for Next.js because we have this router. Now it's very similar to React router, but the router pushes this onto the web address. So we're going to go to a dynamic page. Now we've covered handling dynamic routes already, and that's what this will be. So the only current issue we have is the type here. We notice our little red squiggly under the event here. We don't know what type this is. If you come into the onSubmit and you type E and an arrow like this, this is going to kind of tell us what the type is. So I'll mouse over. It is a form event, says HTML form element when we mouse over and get some IntelliSense. So we know we need the form event. Now we don't want this E here, so let's go ahead and remove this. We come back up here, we're going to go ahead and need to import form event at the top. So here we can say this is a form event, and then it had the HTML inside of it. So let's once again come back. I shouldn't have deleted that. I should have just copied from the IntelliSense, right? So we'll put the E back here, mouse over. It's a form event, and then, oh, I'll just copy the whole thing. It's a form event, and then HTML form element inside. I can't always remember what those are either, so that's a handy little trick for getting that. So let's just copy over all of this and paste, and now we have the correct type in here for our event when the form is submitted. So now with our client component complete, let's go ahead and import it into our Navbar. And of course, notice then that this will not be a client component, but you can use a client component inside of a component that is otherwise generated on the server. And that's what we'll be doing here. So let's import search. This just comes from .search because we're already in the same directory. Now that we have that, it's going to go in the nav after the H1. So here we'll just say search, and we have our component added. Now let's go ahead and look at our application in the browser. There's our search box and the little rocket as well. Let me open DevTools with Control-Shift-I, and I've got the network tab open here. Notice how this shifted because I do have in some Tailwind that is changing the navbar depending on the width of the page. So that's good also. We can get this down a little smaller, even down to phone size. So that should work well. All right, let's go back to VS Code. And in VS Code, we need to create our dynamic route because although we're showing this in our app, the search, of course, is routing to a dynamic route, and we haven't even created that yet. So that's next up, and this will go inside of the app directory. So let's create this dynamic route here. And if you remember, we put those in brackets. So we'll start with a bracket, and then I'll just type search term and close with a bracket. That's what is going to be passed as a param as well. So we have to remember that we used search term with camel case here. And now inside of this dynamic route, let's go ahead and create our page TSX. So page.tsx. And inside of the page.tsx, we want to create our component. I'm going to call this component search results, but we can use our ES7 snippets. And since we're using TypeScript, we can also start with TS, then RFC. I'll press tab. And now notice it added some props for us. So we've got props right here. This is an empty object right here for now, so we can put the rest of the information in. We are going to need those props. So let's go ahead and define props here. It's going to be params. And then inside the params, we're going to have search term, and params are always a string. And so then to start our function here as well, we're going to need params. And then inside of this, we will be destructuring the search term. And that gets our function started. Now from this search term, we're going to request results from Wikipedia, and that's how we're going to get our WikiRocket So what I need to do now is set up a request function. We can't really do much more with this component at this time. So for that request function now, we're going to put this outside of the app directory, just in the root directory itself. We can create a new directory and call it lib for library. And then inside of this, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it getWikiResults.tsx. Now I'm going to type RFC, press tab, and start this function. But it is an async function, so I need to add async up here at the top as well. After that, we know this is going to receive a search term, and that search term is always going to be a string because that's what we will get from the URL. Now I am going to go ahead and highlight this and put the rest of the function in here and then go over it with you because it's really it has a lot of lengthy params here that we're going to create a URL search params. This is a new URL search params. You could look this up on MDN if you're not familiar with URL search params. But when I mouse over, notice it says search params is URL search params type. And here, this is something like with a GET request, you could see all of these parameters added on to the URL with the different things that would take to put in the URL, I should say, like, you know, your ampersand symbol. Of course, it would start with a question mark, and each one of these would have an equals. But we're not doing that. We're just creating the URL search params here, and this is really easy to kind of map it out. Now, notice they're all strings except the search term here, and the search term, of course, is a string as well. It's just being passed in. So all of these different values are something that relates to the Wikipedia API. So it's not a specific type you need to know so much as just the Wikipedia API we're using today needs these. As well, here I'm going to press Alt-Z once again to wrap. But as we request, down here's our fetch, here is the root URL that Wikipedia requires. And then we add on, we concatenate the search terms. And then we're just responding with the JSON that comes from that. So that is the entire function. You can see this in the course resources. You can pause the screen and copy this here. But all of these parameters are required for the Wikipedia API. Okay, after saving this file, I'm going to add a types file as well. So just here in the main directory again, in the root directory, I'm going to create a file and call this types.d.ts. Now, you can create a file like this, or you could create a types folder and create a file for each type if you want to organize it that way. Either way works. When I only have a couple of types, this is a very easy way to do it, and then TypeScript does not require the imports because in your tsconfig file, it's already going to look for any file that has this type of naming convention, just like it finds the nextenv.d.ts. So you can see the other types of files that it does include. Okay, closing out the tsconfig back in the types.d.ts file, I've just got two types that we're going to use today. And again, these are types that relate to that Wikipedia API. I'm just going to paste them in and we'll go over them. You can copy them from the source code repository for this lesson if you want to, or just pause the screen. But we've got a page ID, and every individual result will have a page ID, it will have a title, it will have an extract. Notice the thumbnail is optional, as we see here in the type. And if there is a thumbnail, it should have a source, width, and height. Now, the search result, this is questionable because we aren't guaranteed to get a result from the Wikipedia API. So the query is optional, and the pages is also optional. If we do get pages, it's going to be an array of results, but we just have to keep in mind that these could be undefined as well. Now let's go back and complete our dynamic search term page that is here inside of the dynamic search term results, so we can show those results that we get back. Okay, the first thing we should do is import that getWikiResults function that we created inside of the library folder. So we will import getWikiResults, and you can see it's imported from that alias that we have right here, and then the lib and getWikiResults. After that, let's go ahead and start building out the inside of this function. And the first thing we're going to do is get that Wikidata. So let's define Wikidata. And this is going to be a promise, and it's going to be the type search result that we defined in our types file. If I could spell search result correctly. There we go. Set this equal to getWikiResults, and we'll pass in that search term. Okay, after we have done that, then we need to get the data itself. So here we'll say const data, and this is going to equal await Wikidata. Now, of course, we're flagged here for the await because we didn't make this an async function yet. So let's do that. So now that we have our async function page, and we should just go ahead and rename this page while we're at it because this is our search results component. Of course, it will always keep the file name page.tsx. Okay, after that, let's define our results. So we'll say const results, and this is going to be an array that has results in it, but it could also be undefined as we noted. So more of a union type there. Now that it is either an array of results or it's undefined, let's set this equal to data, and we're not sure if we'll get the query, but if we do, then we're not sure if we'll get pages or not. So we're just saying that yes, this could be undefined. These may not exist, and we just need to code for that if they don't exist. Let's go ahead and scroll up just a little, and then I'm going to define some content here. So I'll say const content equals, and I'll use parentheses. And now inside of this, I'm going to create a main element that we could return. And then inside of the main element, we'll have some other content as well. But let's apply class names to the main for Tailwind. So I'll say class name equals, put our quotes, and I'll bring these classes over again. So Control C there on my other screen and paste that in with Control V. Press Alt Z to wrap that down. So you can see all of these classes here from Tailwind. Now after that, inside of this main element, let's use a ternary. So let's make sure that we actually have results. That's what we defined up here, but remember it could be undefined. So let's make sure we have results. And with this ternary, we'll say if we do have results, then we're going to use object.values because the results come from Wikipedia as a large object. So then we'll pass in the results, and then we'll map over those, and we'll say for each result, we are going to eventually return an item component. But for now, let's just return some JSON here. So I'll come down an extra line, and I'll put in a paragraph. And inside this paragraph, let's say json.stringify, and let's pass in the result. So we could stringify each result here. And it's not necessarily liking that, so let me go ahead and put curly braces for each. Just write this the way I'm used to writing it. And then I can adjust it later when we put in the item component, if that's what we want to do. Oh, and I think the reason it's not liking it yet is because we haven't closed out our ternary statement. So we just also need to provide the false possibility here. So what is going to happen if we don't have results? Well, let's put in an H2, and then inside of the H2, we'll put in some more JavaScript here. And what I'm going to do is use a template literal, and I will use the search term. And then we'll just say not found. And inside this H2, we could put a couple of classes on it. So let's say class name, set this equal to padding-2, and this would also be text-XL. Okay, so there is our content, and what we've got is a main element, and inside the main element, of course, we hope to have results from our search. If we have those results, we're going to map over those values, and that's what will be displayed here. It looks like we still have a problem, actually, and that's because I didn't close out the curly bracket here at the end. So let me go ahead and put that right there, and now everything looks like it should. So hopefully we're going to be showing these stringified results, and of course that's not going to be too pretty on the page, but at least will let us see that we are seeing results. But if there are no results at all, we should be showing whatever the search term is not found on the page. And finally, with our return down here, let's give an extra space, and instead of this, we'll just return the content that we defined above. Okay, with that much in place, let's go ahead and bring up the browser and let's try to search for something. Of course, I could open up the dev tools with Control Shift and the letter I. Here I'm on the console. We could also go to the network and see what comes in. Remember, we're in dev mode, so we'll see more things come through here. So if I refresh, we should see quite a few things load. I'll just clear that out. But let me just search for my name here, and we'll see what shows up on the page. Well, we've got a lot. We've got all of this JSON. It doesn't look great. It actually overflows this container even that it's in, but we know we're getting the data, and that's what's important. From here, we'll be able to format this and it will look good. Let's go back to VS Code and improve this display. And we'll start out by creating some metadata. So let's just scroll up inside of our page file here, and we can create that metadata at the top. If we've covered this before, if you remember, we type export, we'll have async function, and then we're going to use generate metadata. And this is going to receive the same props that we have down here for our search results. So let's just copy that and we can paste that much in. And after we do that, let's go ahead and create the rest of the function. So inside of the function, the first thing we're going to do is request that same data. And remember, we can request data in Next.js wherever we need it, and Next.js will dedupe the requests. So it doesn't hurt to put in the same request here. Now that we've got that data, we want to define a display term. So I'm going to say const display term. We're going to set this equal to the search term that's received, but then I'm going to use replace all. And the reason I'm going to do this is because it's coming from a URL. That's where the search term will be. And if there's spaces, those spaces are represented by %20. And we want to replace those and just put in an empty space so it's more readable by humans, not so much by a browser. And so that makes sense to pass in the search term. And I see I've got some red squigglies, and that's because I missed a parentheses here. It seems like I am prone to some typos today. But now everything looks good once again. And definitely TypeScript helps me catch those. Okay, after we have defined our display term, we have to consider that what if there are no results? And so we want to, of course, adjust the metadata for the page if the search term is not found. So we can do that with an if statement. We'll say if there is no data, and remember, the query might not exist, so we need to use optional chaining there, and then again optional chaining on the pages. But essentially, if we have no results that are eventually found at that pages position in the object, we're going to return some metadata here, and I'll just do the title, and we'll use a template literal. And here we'll use the display term, because again, it's more readable than the search term might be if there are spaces. And we'll just say not found. So that will be the title for our page if no results are found. Otherwise, we can return some more metadata. So let's return another object here. This will have the title, and it will just be the display term for the title. And now let's have a description. And this description could be search results for, and now let's pass in that display term once again. And so this would make sense because we've got a different set of metadata if we have results versus if we don't. Now the next thing we could do to improve our display is actually create an item component. So now let's create a new directory inside of this dynamic search term directory. Call this components. And inside of the components directory, we'll have a new file, and it will be item.tsx. Now let's type tsrfc using snippets here, and we should get a component that also already has some props. So that's good. Now we'll start at the top. We know we need to import link. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. Import link from next/link. After I have that import, let's go ahead and define the props. This is going to be a result, and it will be the result type we have already defined. So when it comes to our item component here, then we will go ahead and say this is result. It is all we really need to put there because we already have the props defined. Okay, after that, we're going to define an item text column. And I'm just going to highlight this, delete this, and paste this in, and we can see what it does. I'll also press Alt-Z so you can see all of the code, but it's all held in this variable. And essentially, we've got a div here, and I've turned it into a flex container. And then we've got the H2, which is the title from the result we see. And you can see we're actually going to link back to the page on Wikipedia for the result, and the target = blank opens it in a new tab. And then I've applied a few Tailwind CSS classes, but what is displayed is the result.title. And then we have the result.extract here. So we have a title and an extract, and that is what our item text column is. After that, I'm going to scroll just a little, and underneath this, I'll paste the content, and I will go over it with you as well. So what we have now is a ternary statement once again, because remember, not all results will have a thumbnail. So we just have to make sure that the thumbnail and the source exist if we're going to display this content, because what this does is take that item text column that we defined up above, and it puts it with the thumbnail if that thumbnail exists. So here you can see we're creating a thumbnail image. It's a very small image, but it has the different information from the result if it exists. And then I'm also just lazy loading it with the normal HTML attribute. Okay, after that, we have, this is the true condition in the ternary, but after that, we also have the false condition, which is much easier. It's just an article that wraps around that item text column that we displayed above. So we're going to either have a thumbnail with our text, or we're not going to have a thumbnail with our text. And that's what this ternary decides with the content. And we eventually just return, if I'd spell return correctly, the content. Now, if this went too fast for you, go ahead and pause the video if you need to, or look at that source code from the course resources, and you'll be able to put this item component together, or just build one of your own. Of course, experiment with that data you see come back from that JSON stringify statement that we still have over in the page file for the search results component before we put this item component into place. With the item component complete, we need to go back to our page and use this item component. So let's import it here at the top. We'll import item, and it should come from components.item. After that, let's scroll down and put it into place instead of this ugly JSON stringify statement here. So instead, we could return our item component, and it's going to have a key, which is going to equal result.pageID. And after that, we want to pass the result. So result is going to equal result as well. And then we can just close out the component here and save the file. Now let's go back and look at our page once again in the browser. I'll pull that up, and the search for Dave is already showing results like we'd expect to see them. Here's all the little thumbnails. There's a lot of thumbnails for Dave's. We could search for something else that might not have as many thumbnails, but we've got some results. Let's try something else. I like the bubblegum search. And the reason I like the bubblegum search is not only are there not thumbnails for each one, but this kind of weird result here for the movie They Live that comes up with all the bubblegum and trading cards results. If you're not familiar with this movie, there is a reason it comes up with bubblegum, and I'll let you look that up on Wikipedia or on this app after you build it. So let's see how our app handles something that is not found. I'm just going to type in some gibberish here and press enter. And yes, it says whatever I just typed in that doesn't make any sense is not found. So we did handle that data that is not found, those results that may not exist, we're handling that correctly. Okay, let's go back to VS Code and we can just add a couple of more things to our project. Inside of our search term directory, the dynamic directory where page is, let's go ahead and add another file and name it error.tsx as we've learned about in previous lessons. I'm just going to paste it in because it pretty much comes from the documentation. However, I did add an extra statement here that says, or go back home. So I gave a link back to the home page. And you could, of course, adjust the error page however you want to. But we've got an error just in case it needs to handle an error. Then let's also go ahead and create a loading page. So another new file here named loading.tsx. And if you remember, loading is using suspense kind of under the hood because this applies to the entire route now, not just part of the page. We could apply it partially to a component by bringing in suspense, as we did in a previous tutorial as well. This will just be a simple loading page in case it takes a while to load our data from the Wikipedia site. So here we've got the loading page. It's just got a few classes and it's just going to say loading. So nothing very big right there. Now that we've got those in place, let's make another search. And let's go ahead and see if we can make a search that takes a while. It looks like I need to back up here back to our original page or maybe refresh. Yeah, now that we've got those changes in. Okay, so let's search for something else, maybe like Eddie Van Halen. And let's see what we get. Do we get loading at first? No, it came up right away. So let's try something else. Maybe we'll get a search that takes a little bit. John happened fast also. It may get results so fast from this API that I do not see the loading, but let me think of something else like Frank Zappa. We briefly saw the loading there for Frank Zappa. So just in case there is a longer delay, you will see that loading due to React suspense. And now that we've built the project, let's go ahead and bring VS Code back up. I've got it back up. Open the terminal once again with Control and the backtick, Control C to stop the application from dev mode. And before we build the project, think about the components we have and ask yourself, are they server-side rendered? Of course, we covered client components today. Are they SSG? Just think in your mind if you can decipher what type of components you have before the build tells you. I'll go ahead and type npm run build. We'll see what components we have, and we can discuss that as soon as it's finished building the project. And the build is complete. I'll go ahead and extend the terminal up here to the top, and let's look at our queue down here, or our key, I should say. The circle indicates static, not SSG, but a complete static page. And this icon here indicates server-side renders, SSR. So that's what we should have. When we come up here to the top, we can see the home page. Even though it has the search component in it that's client-side, the rest of it is just static. And then when we go to the dynamic route for the search term, those are server-side renders. Now, if you remember from a previous lesson, we were able to use getStaticParams and make SSR pages SSG pages. But we could do that with something more like a blog post where we could get those numbers, those IDs in advance. With a search term, that's something that only the user knows what they're going to type in, and they're only going to do that right when they type it in. That may be when they know. We can't really predict what that's going to be. So this is the best we can do there with server-side rendered pages or the search term pages that are generated. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.